Um, I'm going to read from this book for about 15 minutes. It's called Buffalo Free Rapid Transit. There is no free rapid transit in Buffalo anymore, which is about what you need to know to start with. The book is kind of informed by, I don't know, personal brushes with death and collective brushes with death in my city from 2019 to 2022. Um, Buffalo just faced a lot of unnatural disasters. And so some of it proceeds from that place. I'm going to start with a longer poem. I'm going to hope I can make it through. I'm at the kind of the end of an enormous head cold, so we'll see. It's called Ekpyrosis, the Watershed for Samuel Delaney. So I go seeking the crystal wave in the coal of night, the tree below the piling watershed. The altar's made of chalk. The moon's a child keeps in a drawstring bag. So the river surges in the long planet of night, and the banks rise like silver steps. Here are saints' rattles. Here's a tooth sent by the assassin's wife. Midnight opens into a book of light. The book of light opens to hills following hills. They do not burn. They are fossilized forests that are tokens to a game played in the lost language of time, a wave in the mirror of night, which is not the city at all, which is there with its crowding houses, where if I were to say a mist leaps from the utterance's ashes, and we were to drink that ash and water in the final dream of difference before the morning of fire, if the hospital is a university as the prison is the train, over the Buffalo River running where it is entombed and running to meet other waters in a gathering with everything it has been made to take, and if I should say everything streaming from me will be dissolved into dirt and water running to other waters that have run from you as our flesh streams and will stream. And if the final dawn arrives like a river or train you enter to take your place, where if we stay in this long and silver night, the moon does not need to break open like a great green blister. The string holding the lemon of the sun aloft will not have to fray, where we stay with this exhaustion into the waters of the city, with the deranged molecules of the Buffalo River, if we run into the swift and drowning Niagara, into the swift and drowning ashes. Walking the Buffalo's golden corner for half and half, in the sand and the dawn and the banners of the sand of the day. Putting the car in drive, hands where they always arrive, on the wheel to work in a river of Buffalo's lake-blown rain, which begins to gently, finely tug at your boots as it slides towards a storm grate. As you walk down Delavan, as the sun rises, the sun becomes more silver. As you pick up the sponge to apply to the clock face of yesterday's plate, as if in the cellars of a mountain a private dawn arrives. As the martyrs, the representatives of the state turned into unmarked tombs tremble. The shower you took already soaking your clothes. As you glance wildly around the kitchen at a tomato on your cutting board as big as a small pumpkin, as you think of them in the holy shell of their dreams down the hall, but it is too late. You have to go. As the rivers below the river meet and rise in a silver welter, as the sky begins to ring as the river you are shedding, lids, wrappers, cellophane, and carbon, hair, prayers, and a look away from what is to come, as you arrive at the gates of an unholy planet. And the horses in the river and the pounding of the water and punching in the digits of the clock and cutting stems off 700 broccoli bunches, wrist by wrist by wrist by wrist, and the foam exploding over what it makes the shore, and hit that vocal smooth over the top of the tablet to say everything is going good in this transaction. And the colorless candle of dawn and the glycerin taking and refracting and the soft rolling away, peeling apart color from color in an array. And the time app severed into now, already in the way to the task app's ding, presses the sweaty hand to the hypnotic blender. In the deer in the river, in the deer in the river, in the hair, and the sprinting of the calcified bear, and lugging 40 pounds of carrots through cradles full of scarecrows in the IKEA in the middle heart of the moon, and the showers of ice chips, the water that is leaving this earth, and gassing up a chainsaw behind the backs of the armored insects of the state, and the ocean touching the ocean, and the ocean beneath the sea, and checking the stars, and ferrying the meds, and tossing out the bag glossy with what a body could not contain, and all one's beautiful nest of thoughts of the tides of one's feeling paid as a wage, and someone else's dream snatched at and slung back in the driver's seat on the two closed cars of a parking lot, in the recombinant currents, the water main burst what had been safe into cataracts of fire, the burning rivers of time, the burning lakes and hills of time, the jumbles of letters and keys, millions of fingertips spatter into the dawn that breaks through the dawn that breaks through the dawn, the river that breaks through the dawn that breaks through the river, and the empire of time. Clock in and out, in the mounds of sawdust, at last. Clock in and out, so the waters of the grassy self rise, as work makes blind the steps and banks, as the endlessly user-tested celestial body dilates with the light of cash, as the banks give way, the endlessly dead feed, glittering oil from every pore, clock in and out, on the wafer of a lens, on the punch posted on the wall, through the slip of paper authenticated by the boss, clock in and out, while the whole good world bleeds, clock in and out, hungry and in need. One engine winds down, another fills with fire for the forced double where the plant runs on both sides of life. Clock in and out, while evicted intelligence try to find a language for a no that lasts, in the rising tides of shadows, water breaking everywhere, spreading blankets in the box van, sweating sex and children and laughter in the rivets which fly down the line, learning the codes of exhaustion, the devices of escape, holding the steering wheel lightly on a thinning ribbon between bridges of water, between sleep and sleep, under a burning bulb of cash. Clock in and out, in a self that is pouring into a mattress, that is burning in this municipality, that is burning in the empire of time. Mm. This one's called Thanksgiving Ambulance. It's for a neighbor I had on Eastwood Place. Bo is dead. We heard Bo hammer guitar chords from his balcony to our window, wrists fanning a rhythm so unlike the tangled red and white lights we look down on while cooking. Landlords say they want to see a buffalo reborn. But what about this carpenter they paid under the table who lay on the floor uninsured and alone in his final hour? While I transplanted parsley and Bo smoked a joint, we talked across the fence about how we hurt ourselves making money, how prayer, weed, and addiction were reasonable answers to the world's cruel traps. Bo ripping boards with Preston, his brother, on the corner of Glendale and Maine. Gripping a board, Preston squaring it up, letting the saw fly, everything turned to consonant dimensions under the shining aluminum sun of a building they gave a season to for some diamond humper to double rents. We didn't know Bo was dead until Preston told us a week later who the ambulance attended. Preston was already back to work on the Glendale house, where he thought he'd move because he couldn't stand to sleep where his baby brother died. But the man who paid him in housing and owned everything about his life just moved Preston to a smaller unit above the one where his brother died. The final time we talked, Bo said he'd replaced the drain pipe he crushed, wrestling a trash can through the snow. Now Preston says he'll do it. Shit. Thank you. Heavy rolling bells in Buffalo. And if from the Buffalo water line, as it dawns cold, as bells rang to announce another winter, it was not cold. No lead proceeded from the pipe. The first bus went straight home, so it felt like home. To walk and walk, the meridians of one's feet soar by all the cars parked zigzag across driveways. because there is nowhere to go, as if there were food, and it's warm, and it stays unspoiled in every kid's stomach. Whoever wanders up to however many table, as if the snow flattens long empty houses to grass, each block like a gap-toothed smile, was not the city preparing to give itself away, to never get itself back, but to hold the people that live and sweat here. Heavy bells roll through Buffalo, to walk and walk along the ribbon of Skajakwada Creek, through hills and asphalt cooling for 60 years, as if how anything looked mattered less than how everyone was with each other, through the work of providing for each other. And every sound and laugh and siren, every wheel rumble, each booted step through snow, every cry, every alarm of need, every peal of desire. So the book, the book is kind of in, elegy mode for a fair amount of time. It gets out of there eventually at some point. Um, and it's kind of a companion to another book that I had written that was about, all the most garbage people in Buffalo doing the terrible things they had done to themselves. And so since Tyler mentioned vengeance, I think in one of his like social media posts, I felt I would be remiss if I did not try to deliver some vengeance. Um, so this is a poem that I kind of wrote in response to an invitation to perform something at a May Day rally to evict ICE from their downtown headquarters in Buffalo. That's where their whole like Western New York, like field office is. And the idea is, well, we'll evict them today, and then wherever they go next, we'll evict them there too. So this is the poem I wrote for that event. And I think that's why I'm sick, because it was raining the whole event and I was wildly underdressed. But the campaign is a good one. So it's called ICE Enforcement and Removal Operations Deputy Field Officer Joseph Frieden, right? And there was an article that he wrote, like one of these news announcements from their propaganda office, where he called people opposing ICE violent lunatics. So this poem is for him. And if Joseph Frieden were snatched into a van in the Walton Gallery alive, and if Joseph Frieden was cuffed on the curb of Asia Food Market halfway through a shift, and if Joseph Frieden was stolen from a roofing job in Parkside or followed from his apartment off Sweet Home, and if Joseph Frieden were staked out at a court date downtown, yanked from his car after a wrong turn to the Peace Bridge, and if Joseph Frieden were stalked on the West Side because he was from a country the Confederates in charge are trying to destroy, and if Joseph Frieden were stolen from his university study, art, the hands, minds, and heart that sculpt and draw, shipped to a Louisiana gulag, and if Joseph Frieden were pulled over on Delavan or Fillmore because of the color of his skin, van impounded the tools the raft one uses to float a family and kids through the difficult waters of this world, and if Joseph Frieden was shut inside his home, so many homes, more than we will know, for fear masked men's knocks, and if from that fear Joseph Frieden took his kids from school and now they're just hanging around the house on their phone, he's starting to think that he can't even afford that. And if Joseph Frieden were blind and stranded without shoes by Border Patrol in the snow of a deeper and deeper Buffalo, nowhere to go he didn't even know was Buffalo. And if Joseph Frieden, you were on the other side of the law, no one would check on you. No one in the chat would come to pick you up. No one would drive your kids to karate or drop groceries at your door or patrol your block. No one would chip into your bail fund, Joseph Frieden. You have no neighbors. You have made yourself a stranger to everyone. Because Joseph Frieden, it's May Day and you're not a worker. You're wallowing in the mud of a six-figure salary, an office with a view, and a jail cell subsidized by the city, an elevator ride from a porterhouse steak. Joseph Frieden, it's May Day, and you're not a worker. I should have mentioned there were like a bunch of union people at the event too, right? That was like the applause line for the for the union people. Anyway, okay, so that, yeah, that was 15 minutes. All right, so good. I'm done reading poems. I'm done reading poems. Um, what's next?
We'll have Al and Joe in conversation here in the
Okay.
allotted purple chairs.
Do you have a preference now? Not at all.
One more off camera.
Okay.
Just speak to the emptiness. Um, that was a beautiful read, Joe. I always love how physical, how bodily your readings always are. And it's always a pleasure to hear you read good poems like that. 7 books in the bag. Could we just start with how this one came about? Like, how is this different after 7 books? You've been doing this for so long. How is this different or similar to the previous books that you've written?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so like, yeah, how did it come about? What
Yeah.
is its relationship to the other books?
Yeah.
You know, I think I feel like some of my favorite poets are ones that I feel like in a way are like kind of try to do something new with every book. Or like, I think my goal is to write a book that the person who liked the previous one hates. But that doesn't, I don't always, that's just something I tell myself to try to make it different. But this one came about largely through the COVID lockdowns. It was written in that space, and I had a lot of time by myself, but also a lot of time to walk through the city. So we had just moved to a house, near the interstate that kind of like cuts part of Buffalo apart from itself, and I just spent a lot of time walking through the city. And a lot of it was like empty. A lot of it is the parts of the city that have been like where there's like organized abandonment, right? Like, and so I felt like a lot of the texture of the city and its lived environment was with me. And at the same time, my friends had this thing that we would do. We would just go to a park, and we called ourselves the Annus Mirabilis, like the horrible, or what is it? Yeah, the Annus Mirabilis like working group, but it just was a drinking group that we just hung out in the park. And but that moment where like so many things were sort of falling away, like it really made me think about like what does hold like people together in a space, like what is that, and so I wanted to write poems that were a lot more attentive to my city, but also like the people in the city, right? And so that was part of it. And because I've been walking so much and feeling this sense of space and stretch, I wanted to write it all in really long lines that were kind of putting things together really associatively. And during it, the uprisings of 2020 happened, and so some of that feeds its way into the book as well. And so I felt like I was experiencing the most disastrous and awful version. Not I, but like the city was experiencing the most awful and disastrous version of itself, right? In that moment, right? Martin Guggenot was like, had his head cracked open in front of City Hall that year. That made like national news, right? But also there was incredible community organizing, and just examples of people taking care of each other in that moment as well. So I wanted a book that felt like it was giving a vision of the city that was both real and not real, that was both a vision of the city in crisis, but also like there are flashes of like a utopic city, the city we want, right? And that's where the Buffalo Free Rapid Transit comes from, right? Like what if we just like named these things that we would want from the city? I have one poem that's just about like, wow, what if there were public toilets? Wouldn't that be cool? And so that's kind of it. I mean, I think the way that it plays with other books is I'd mentioned the previous book that I'd written, People Finder Buffalo. And the goal of that book was to write a poem for multiple members of the ruling class of Buffalo, like I did with the final poem I read. And again, to have them doing this awful thing they had done to themselves. And it felt like my first mentor in poetry, Lucille Clifton, was like, you can put anything in a poem. Like you can put your love, you can put your hate, you can put your wrath, especially your wrath, in a poem, and it'll transform it. And I was like, okay, what if I just put a ton of wrath into this book, right? Um, and like perform a kind of malediction on these people who are causing really real harm. But you can only do so much of that before you start to like
Mm.
deform your brain a little bit. So I felt like this book has a lot more love in it, even
Mhm.
if it's not like on the surface.
No, I think that's a fair way to describe it. When I was reading it, I felt like it was both elegiac, as you were referencing earlier, but also it felt like a true love letter to Buffalo and the people in Buffalo. Thinking about this book's relation to your other books, one of the poems, Buffalo Free Rapid Transit, is also a poem that appears in Fugue and Strike.
Hmm.
And I thought that was really interesting, thinking about like the relationship and how Fugue also works its way back into the collection. Could you talk a little bit about that? Like why you chose that, or like what's the relationship between those two books specifically?
Mm. Okay, yeah, yeah, Fugue and Strike. Yeah, so Fugue and Strike came out in 2023, and half of it are these poems about sanitation strikes and people
Hmm.
weaponizing their labor or protesting against, like bad conditions that involve waste somehow. Um, but it also has these poems that are called like fugues in them, and they're kind of like associative long line poems. And some of the poems in Buffalo Free Rapid Transit did kind of migrate from Fugue and Strike. Um, like, what is the relation there? Like, why is that? Well, I just felt like I wasn't done.
Okay, yeah.
I felt like I wasn't done. But that also, like, I felt that like the poems from that book like had a role to play in the new one as well.
Yeah.
And like this idea that like I don't know, like a poem can only be published once and then we're done with that, like that's just fake. Like people just made that up. Like I want to think of a entire book as like an orchestral arrangement, right? And
Mm.
so I want to be able to take whatever piece I need um, um, to complete that arrangement and to put it in there. And I felt like I really did need that piece.
That's cool.
Yeah. And fortunately, my publisher didn't care, so that's very helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's good to have an editor or a publisher on your side when you're doing these little experiments.
Yeah,
I
totally.
thought it was cool. I thought it was a great way of like recontextualizing the poem and having us rethink
Mm.
the poem, and then
Hmm.
also then it creates this like really interesting relationship that's linked to the collection.
Hmm.
Because I was going through the book, I'm like, oh, I didn't really realize at the time, like, oh, there's this really direct relationship between these two books.
Yeah, yeah.
So I thought that was really cool to see. You were talking about earlier how, you know, during the pandemic, during those quarantine times, as you're walking around, you were observing all like the spaces, the people gathering, the relationships that emerged. Um, and one of the things that kept coming up as I was reading your book, there was like a clear perspective that the book was going for, or like a viewpoint. Public transit being a place that I feel like there's frequently appears, and also labor. Labor is also constantly appearing in your work. And I was wondering if you could
Hmm.
speak to like their importance to this collection.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, in general, like we owe the world to labor,
Hmm.
right? Like it's all here because of somebody's work. Um, and as like a just a baseline foundational fact, I never want to forget that.
Hmm.
Um, and I think part of what I find so, poignant about Buffalo is, you walk down your street and you see a house falling apart. And I do think of and maybe someone's tried to repair it a little bit, right? But I think of all the labor it took to produce that house and how much work like went into just maintaining it, right? And how much work even goes into the people who live in that house, like just managing its decline because they can't afford to do anything larger to it. And so like it's like because when things fall apart to me, actually the labor of it becomes more like evident. And so
Mm.
I do think that that is something that resonates with me um, in terms of like, well, why was I thinking about labor, just like walking around Buffalo? Um, I mean, I think the other part of it is just that I did. like, I have some experience in like light industrial work and things like that. And I was on the other side of a PhD program right when I started to compose this book. And for part of it, I was working at a bookstore. Part of it, I was working at a labor library. So the labor stuff was still in my brain. But then when I moved back to Buffalo, we'd left Buffalo for a year, and I moved back right before the pandemic. And I still wasn't and I didn't have a job plan in mind at all.
Mhm.
My partner had gotten a job, and I was literally doing odd jobs. I was like landscaping. I was working at a cannabis farm and got fired, so I got like laid off from a cannabis farm. So so I was still working my way through all these different kinds
Yeah.
of jobs, and so and working with people who had been doing them for much longer, and so I wanted a lot, like that just feeds its way, yeah, like into the book,
Mhm.
right? Um, and and so you know. Um, the book I think is also a little bit about survival,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah.
just like the hell of a, it just takes a hell of a lot of work to survive.
I mean,
Um,
that stretch especially was like a completely like a truly tumultuous time for
mhm.
Buffalo for sure.
Yeah,
You know.
right, right, right. And so, okay, so transit, yeah, I mean, um, transit is there certainly in dialogue with that like tumult, right?
Hmm.
Like because Buffalo is a particularly underserved city, particularly its minority and Black community is particularly underserved, both when it comes to public transit, but also because we have, like the East Side, where the majority of the Black population of Buffalo lives, like was cut in half by, like a freeway, the 33, right? So there are these, incredible iniquities in terms of like speed and mobility, right?
Hmm.
Where it's like, the highway is there for the mobility and convenience of suburbanites, right? When it actually makes life like much more challenging if you're a pedestrian, on the east side,
Hmm.
right? And yeah, I don't know. So some of that is kind of like floating around there, and I think there is just something about like trains, that and the idea that like in cities like Buffalo and Rochester, that there used to be like a free streetcar system and things
Hmm.
like this. There used to be this kind of freedom of movement that was possible for the majority of the population. That had been there and was purposefully like destroyed,
Hmm.
right? And so for me, it's like if we were to imagine futures for these cities and the people in them, it does seem like mobility is a huge part of that, right?
Hmm.
Like being able to actually move through the city, right?
Hmm.
And to not experience it as this space that has all these incredible like barriers and boundaries
Hmm.
and enclosures that keep people in their neighborhoods,
Hmm.
right? Yeah. Right. So that's part of it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Um, One of the things I admire about your poems is how explicitly political they are, that they air their grievances or their concerns so directly. There
Yeah.
is no
Yeah.
dancing around what the poem is trying to address.
Mm-hmm.
And I often think of political poems as being tricky territory, right?
Hmm.
Because it still needs to be a poem and can sometimes easily slip into something didactic.
Hmm.
And I'm wondering for you, what are you like? What are some things that you try to keep in mind as you are writing these poems that are so explicitly political? Like, what are the things that you think make a good political poem?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a really good question. And I think it's a question that like I don't look just for my answer. Like we need a lot of answers to that question. But I think the thing that I would say about political poetry is like I do think everything is political already. So like all poems are political to a certain degree, but like I think what's been really productive for me is just to think about like who am I writing this poem for?
Mhm.
Where will it get experienced in both space and time? So when I'm writing the poems where it's like, okay, here's a poem about the sheriff hanging himself, right? It's like that's like a little gratifying for me, and it's kind of dumb and straightforward, right? Like, but whatever. But like I knew that I would be able to read those poems in Buffalo, and I knew that I would be able to read them in
Mm.
politicized spaces, and I knew that I would be able to read them like for an audience that would feel and experience those poems as cathartic because I was describing people in Buffalo. I was
Mm.
describing like this landlord or that developer or this like obscure councilman, right? Like, and no one else was going to write a poem about Ulysses S. Wingo, the councilman of the Maston district or whatever, right? Like, this wasn't going to happen. So, like, I think it's like, where can I fill a space that actually isn't already being addressed? Like, I don't need to read a poem about the fat orange monster, right? Like, I don't like the world doesn't need another poem that's like just about coming up with
Mm.
synonyms for the president of the United States. Like that base has been covered, and also it doesn't actually it doesn't actually like make visible anything that isn't already visible, right?
Mhm.
But when we think about a city like Buffalo or Rochester, and you think about how power operates, right?
Mhm.
Like it's often operating in ways that aren't remarked upon, right? With like developers, or like here's like a sub police commissioner, or like here's like what this council person is up to and who's like paying, putting money in their pocket.
Mhm.
Like it's very easy to like have national targets, but it's very less common to be able to like actually understand our most local political and social spaces, and then be able to like punch out at those, right? So, and we often don't think there's an audience for those, but for me it's just been trying to think about like like writing political poems but within the very specific context of my city.
Mhm.
um and I had to like, so how do you do it well? Like, I'm not sure again, right? But like, I had to do a lot of research, right? I
Mm.
had to like learn a lot, and learn from people that were doing that work, about the city,
Mhm.
um, and feed those into the poems, right? And like, go to jail, like, do some work, right? Like, going to like the Buffalo Federal, detention, and so not just to do internet research, but also like to like meet people and have experiences, and then
Mhm.
to try to feed that into like a poem that could speak to people, and then to be able to perform that poem like in those spaces, right? Like I think the art of a poem is being on time, right?
Mm. Mm. Tell me more
Like
about that. What do you mean by this?
well, it doesn't, like in 5 years, like not like that poem I just read won't make any sense, right? Like,
Mhm.
or it may not, or it'll make less sense, right? But it's like reality is constantly happening, and it's very confusing, right? There's lots of things happening, right? Like we're constantly trying to um, reconstitute our mental map of the world around us,
Mhm.
right? And so if the poem can arrive early and help people do that, like then, and speed them up, then that's great.
Mhm.
If the poem is telling people what they already know in terms that they already know, then maybe it's late, right?
Mm.
And so if the poem is on time, I think it's done what it needs to do. And it doesn't have to then live. It can die, right? Like it can die, it can go away. Like the poem I read already feels late, like it was written for May Day
Yeah.
to be read in front of the ICE, offices.
Mhm.
That's what it's for, right? So I think context is really important. But if we just fixate on the page and like this idea that it needs to speak eternally, then um like I think like most poems will fail,
Mm.
right? And of course, like there needs to be a sense of craft too.
Sure.
Like I think a lot about rhythm. Like I think profoundly about rhythm, right?
Mhm.
Um and that's part of it as well. Yeah.
No. I'm trying to think about what you were saying because so often we hear about the universality of a poem, right? Its
Hmm.
ability to survive,
Hmm.
but it sounds like you're arguing on behalf of particularity. Like, let's focus on the
Hmm.
specific,
Hmm.
in the moment, and like,
Hmm.
let's not worry about whether or not this poem is going to last 20 years from now. Like,
Hmm.
I just want to speak to this historical moment. Is that fair to say as far as what you're describing in your point of view for poems?
That's interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. I mean, yeah, I mean, and if people want to write a poem that has more universal themes, like go for it, right?
Yeah.
But I do think like politics is made by specific people in specific
Mm.
times, and like to write a poem with charge, like it is helpful to illuminate like the exact spaces that we're trying to like live and survive in.
Mm.
And who knows? Like history, often like repeats itself,
Mm,
or like
fair.
there are moments that like slant rhyme with each other. So even if you're writing to a specific moment and then it becomes irrelevant for a long time, and people are like, I don't know what the fuck this means, right? Like, but then like, history could rhyme again, and then like the future touches the past.
Mm,
Um, and like you've created maybe an image, right? That can then migrate from the past
mm,
to the future, right? As the future again resembles the past again,
hmm.
So it could find its time again, but I don't think it's, for me, it's not, I'm not always focused, I'm
Yeah.
not focused on that too
Yeah.
much. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so speaking of like sort of like the hyper specificity of your writing, like focusing on these things, and speaking to a Buffalo audience or an
Mm.
audience from sort of
Hmm.
like that might understand sort of like Rust Belt politics and things like that.
Yeah.
What are you hoping people who are outside of that context, when they come to your poems,
Mm.
is there something that you have in mind, like you hope that they draw from that they
Hmm.
get a sense of Buffalo or anything along those lines?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good question, right? So, yeah, I mean, if we take a book like People Finder Buffalo, which is so hyper specific.
Hmm.
Um, I think that people can also see if they are in a city like Buffalo, they might be able to see their own city in it, right? And their
Hmm.
own garbage people in it, right? But also, you know, um, part of the purpose of the book is, like you name person after person after person.
Hmm.
Um, And then, like, hopefully, what is imminent or what emerges from that is a sense of like a power structure, right?
Hmm.
And like every place has a power structure. And so, what I would like my dream would just somebody to read it and be like, oh, this is actually incredibly simple. What Joe is doing is like really simple. Like he's just identifying these people and writing down what they've done,
Mm,
right? Like, okay, well, anyone can do that. Like, what I would love is for someone to be like, oh, I could do this in my community. Like, I could
mm,
do this, and people can do it in reverse as well. Like, I could look at my community and I could be like, here are the people in my community who are doing really awesome stuff, right? Or things that I think actually like change the field,
mm,
right? And like I'll write about them, and I'll write a poem that just boosts them and give it to them, and they'll love it, right? Like,
mm.
I mean, that's what I would love is just this sense of, um, yeah, orienting to the specificity of the places where we are in, and the specificity of the people and we're in, and that just understanding that matters.
Hmm.
Yeah, that
It's
matters.
like decentralizing poetry or the way we
Yeah,
think about poetry.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's not one monolithic thing. We can make poems that are specific to our time and place, and
Hmm.
and everyone can pick up their own banner and like do their own thing with poems and speak to their own communities.
Yeah, totally. Right, right. Absolutely.
I love that. I love that. That's really cool. Um, We'll talk about some of the poems actually in the collection as well.
Okay.
One of the poems that I was really interested in the collection was Breath Gradients, Block by Block.
Okay. Yeah.
One, because it felt a little different from the other poems. The poems, you were talking about these sort of long, exhaustive lines as you're trying to
Hmm.
like catalog and capture what Buffalo was going through at the time and just making a list and taking account of everything. But this one, you open up the poem. There's all this space in between. It feels
Mm.
where the other poems feel like you are speaking outwardly.
Mm.
This one always felt internal to me. Like it
Mm.
felt more meditative. I mean, maybe I'm misrepresenting it, but I would love to hear your sort of process or what you were thinking when you were writing this poem.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I mean, I love that you brought that one up. Um, and if I do a longer reading, I end with that poem.
Mm,
Um, so I guess I'll just say a couple things about that poem. Um, the other poems have much longer lines, or a
mhm.
lot of them do. I wrote this one after I had had shoulder surgery. It was just like,
You're like, I can't do
yeah,
this
yeah,
longer
yeah. It's like
anymore.
kind of a
The
physical,
muscle strain.
yeah, muscle strain. But um, and I wasn't like I wasn't like there wasn't the sense of like physical capaciousness
Mm,
in it. Um, but in terms of its more internal thought, um, I did want to end the book with a poem that wasn't like hollering, at the audience.
Mm,
Um, a poem that was still long and felt like it was sweeping up
hmm
a lot of the events and people of the book. Um, but then also just left more space uh, for tenderness
hmm
and more space for an incompletion that hopefully the reader could fill in.
hmm
Um, and so, yeah, that felt like a form and a mode, yeah, that might be able to do that. But I feel like you're helping me understand this, right? Because you write a book and it's
Sure.
you're like impulsive and you just make sense to you. But yeah, yeah,
No, I mean, like, I could be wrong too, so like, don't take my word for it. But I mean, it was like when I was reading the poem, and after like going through like these bracing lines, and then I get to this poem, and it just felt quieter.
yeah.
And I kept thinking to myself like, well, but like, there's like I could take a breath for
Hmm.
a moment, with this
Hmm.
poem, and it just felt tonally just like a little different. There was a little more melancholy, a little bit more
Mm.
something more methodical about it that was very different from the other poems.
Yeah, and actually, that's good. Like the idea of breath, yeah,
Hmm
because the the final poem was written. After I was on the Skyway. There's this like Skyway that doesn't make any sense in Buffalo. It's like an
hmm
elevated highway. And I wrote it in maybe it was two or three, maybe three or four, I don't remember. It was whatever summer it was where the Canadian wildfires were like really, really bad,
hmm
right? And so I was driving and so the sky was all smudged from the Canadian wildfires and I was on the freeway and then I just saw like a house burning, right? And this happens all the time in Buffalo because the house had really old wiring. So this house was just
mm
burning really hard and all the smoke was like coming up from that and joining like the Ontario smoke into this like horrible like concentration of like these
Yeah.
places. And I got a really bad respiratory infection
mm
during that time. And so like I did want a poem, I like you said, room to breathe, right? Like a poem where when you read it, like that where breath is apparent, right?
hmm
And when I read it, like there's like far more space for breath, right?
hmm
Um, so like yeah, it's making more of an architecture of breath and silence,
hmm
right? Which is something Lee Young Lee always said a poem is an architecture of
I
silence.
like
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah.
I'm not steal that one. I can't steal that one. I like
Good.
this.
Good for the class.
Yeah, it is great for the class. Um,
We can jump in for audience questions.
Yeah.
yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
If anyone here has any questions for Joe or Al, it'd be a great time for it. I'll open that up to the folks that are on virtual too. But yeah, any thoughts?
Oh, well, go ahead, Scott. I was wondering what you thought were the exciting new trends in poetry.
I know that's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, what do you think, Al?
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I don't know what would be sort of like the new, sort of like the dominant modes right now. Um, I don't know if I would call it a trend, but I do think we are seeing maybe a transition in platforms,
Mhm.
right? Like we're seeing more social media accounts now becoming sort of like a dominant way of like promoting, but also featuring work in progress. It has, and even poet, like before, what used to be, we would refer to Instagram poets derisively. I do think they're actually legitimate posts now using it as a
Mhm.
platform effectively.
Mhm. I mean,
Um,
Rupi Kaur is based now.
yeah.
Far more than the Chancellor of the American Academy of
It's like,
Poets.
is it Katie Bear, who's somebody who has been good for herself? Like she's sort of
Mhm.
like emerged on Instagram. I'm hoping referring to the right person. Yeah, and then but has also now been featured in places like the New Yorker and has sort of like emerged as a
Mhm.
poet who's got some reputation. So it's now becoming a legitimized
Mhm.
platform. I have this running theory right now that like The thing about Instagram poets that I've often hated, but I'm like, well, maybe they're filling a commercial poetry space. Like, the way we
Mhm.
have genre fiction. I'm like, maybe there is now space for like a commercial poetry, and like
Mhm.
it appeals to a certain kind of audience that it's accessible, it's easily consumable, it follows a particular form. And that hasn't been a thing that maybe that's a thing that people have been craving.
Mhm.
So I don't, but I mean, I don't know what else is
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
Someone,
Yeah, media like as media
yeah,
changes, like poetry will change alongside of it.
yeah,
So yeah, that I think there's really interesting things happening in the translation space right now. Like I
yeah,
think a lot more people are able to like reach out internationally and develop those
that's right.
connections. And so I even though like there's less funding for it, I
Mhm.
think more people are doing it. And to me, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the translations of work from Arabic into English
Mhm.
has been some of the best work that I've read
Mhm.
recently. So poetry and translation. I think I like weird stuff, and I have a friend in Ohio who prints books on like receipt tapes, and at like a very cheap cost,
Yeah.
and that's been really exciting to me. So it's like as as technology changes, old stuff like obsolesces. So like whatever people are going to make with like obsolescent technology, I am
Mhm.
going to be very excited about. Like yeah, like what do you do with a stack of like 2005 Acer laptops. Like, I can't wait. You know, um, like that would be cool. Yeah, yeah.
Don't you do something similar with like hostel books, like where you kind of do sort of like unconventional materials
Oh,
for
yeah,
for
yeah.
poems? Could you talk a little bit about that stuff?
Um, well, Mike Flatt is here, and Mike was here at the ground floor. Mike Flatt made poems on asbestos discs. Um, so the idea was to make poems on hostile materials. Um, I guess as environmental regulations go away, we'll have more hostile materials to make poems from. Um, but it's yeah, but it is the idea where that it's like, what is a page?
Yeah.
Like not to be corny, but it's like I don't know anything, right?
Yeah.
Like I do like the idea that like, if people read less books, that's sad.
Hmm.
If literacy goes down, that's sad. But also like it's like, well, okay, well, what if we just put words in front of people or on building faces or, you know, on things that can circulate and make their ways, to unexpected places.
Hmm.
Like I get really interested in that, but I don't know if that's a trend.
Yeah.
I think that
That.
is a personal obsession, more than a trend. Yeah.
Um, so I think that obviously I've been to work for a long time. I've known each other a long time, but the things I'm finding interesting about homes over the last couple of years is the way that a seeming like documentary poetics is kind of
Mhm.
coming in, like, and that's obviously a kind of specific term that calls certain poets to mind. And obviously, you think of like Mark Novak, who also focused on Buffalo
Mhm.
in a lot of his writing and like Shut Up, Shut Down. But the way that you engage with the lyric alongside that is obviously what would distinguish your writing from documentary poetics. And so I guess I'm wondering how you kind of see the lyric and documentation working together or getting in the way of each other.
Mhm.
Like I work, I've struggled with this in my own writing a little bit too, or like kind of engaged with it, I should say.
Mm.
Like how much to bring like things that feel like internal associations, things that are just happening for me subjectively, and things that are happening objectively.
Mhm.
Kind of how you kind of like navigate that space between.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and like documentary poetics is, hopefully somewhat self-explanatory, but it's like a research-driven poetics, right? One that might involve, taking materials from archives or doing firsthand documentation,
Mhm.
and then putting that into a poem, so that there is a kind of facticity to the poem that it's built on, right? Um, and so, um, I think there are a lot of different kind of schools of documentary poetry.
Mhm.
And then like I think the Mark Nowak school in particular has placed a great premium on I think the objective. Yeah, absolutely, right. Which is like and like a peeling back away of the author like to a really extreme degree and be like, here's just the material, yeah, of the world. And I think that that can do amazing work. Yeah, absolutely. Like it's true that like my own work will put the documentarian alongside the lyric or do like add a conscious dose of unreality to it.
Mhm.
So when people are, when I'm doing my Hieronymus Bosch poems where bad people do the bad things to themselves, like they are footnoted. So there's like a clear structure which is saying like here is what they have done, right?
Mhm.
And here are the sources. And so if you want that baseline, like this is the baseline, right? But the poem itself is like performing in a self-conscious act of imagination,
Mhm.
right? And I think it's an uneasy space. Like I think we should be uncomfortable. I am uncomfortable doing it. Like when I first wrote those poems, I was like, I don't feel comfortable about this, but fuck these people. Um, and also like I don't have much, like if people don't like it, then they cannot like it. But I think there's also another a school of documentary poetry, which I understand less, but I find myself also interested in,
Mhm.
which was kind of the Ed Sanders, like he was kind of a 70s guy, like, and he had he was the author of Fuck You Mag or the editor of Fuck You magazine. Um and so obviously like the subjective was okay. But I mean he just had this approach which was like you need to open a file on everybody and everything, right? Which is so it's like especially your friends. You should open a file on your friends and like just capture everything, right? And so I felt like his version of documentation was far more intimate, sometimes, or like at least how he would propose it. Like you're just doing this all the time, right? So why not produce like, your receipts? And so, and his approach, I think, evoked the surreal and the freaky like a lot more. But I would also even, I'm sorry, I'll stop because I'm just thinking out loud. This is not focused. But so if you go back to like Muriel Rukeyser, right? Everyone's like, oh, Muriel Rukeyser, right? Like documentary poet. But like the final poems of the Book of the Dead, it's like a tall lady walking around, like or something, right? It's like, yeah, no,
I haven't looked at it.
yeah. But it ends with like a utopic poem that is like a highly lyrical poem. And so it is interesting to think that like that actually has been happening from the jump, which is people doing that documentary. And for Rukeyser's final poem, the reason that final poem was there is that it was like her idiosyncratic utopic version of like the world that could be. So she documents a horrible thing, this mining disaster, right? And that's our baseline facticity.
Mhm.
And it's interesting to think that she felt like that was not enough. Like we cannot just have a version of like we cannot just recapitulate tragedy. Um, and for her, like, and this was a very optimistic time in which she was writing it. Like, so she wanted to accompany that with a vision of the future,
Mhm.
right? Like, so what, here's the bad thing we don't want. Here's the thing we do want.
Mhm.
I think producing um, visions of the future is really important. Like, we can't cede that ground, right? Because that's like what the futurists are, like our current like fascist techno futurists are doing. Like they have a really like concrete plan for the future, right? So if all we ever do is recapitulate what has been, like I think we cede that ground.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. But but again, how do you do it? How do you do it well? What are the ethical lines? That's still a really important question. Yeah.
I wonder, maybe I'll ask a question to close this out. It relates a little bit to what Scott asked, but I'm curious about images in your work. Because of People Finder Buffalo, there's a couple of images in that poem, and I see that as I don't use trend as a pejorative. I think there is kind of a trend right now, a lot of hybrid books. That's a word you'll hear. And also, if you're submitting poetry, you'll see this in submission categories all the time now. fiction, nonfiction, poetry, hybrid. So hybrid can mean mixing forms, but it could also mean that your form is using an image in some way, like actually reproducing a photograph, or like the poem takes a concrete shape. Or in Joe's People Finder Buffalo, there's a poem that's like in the shape of a coupon. I read that as a poem. Maybe it's just a graphic. I don't know. But and then in the back there's a map that shows businesses in Buffalo that are complicit in the genocide in Gaza. So like that I don't know if I read that as a poem, but I don't. But when I get to the end of that book and I see that in the book, I understand that this image belongs in the book as much as any other poem. Like it makes sense to me. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about image in work, and if what that means to you, or maybe just why you put those images in People Finder Buffalo.
Yeah. You know, I think this is an answer to your question about trends, right? Because I didn't write the book with any images like in mind necessarily. But I was working with an extremely talented book designer, and like design software has gotten really good and really, really flexible. And he's a really creative designer. And so, you know, he like below the coupon was like more of like, oh, here's just like a box with some text. It looked like crap. But Mike turn that into something far better. And he also saw that like some folks that I had been working, like I had worked to help make that map of genocide profiteers with with a friend, and he was like, "What if we put that in there as well?" And so I do think that like there's this incredible space or possibility, you know, if we embrace it, of poets and designers, you know, like you can offer the poem, but if you're working with a talented designer, like they can basically collaborate with you and add visual elements that increase the signifying power of your thing. And in a way, it's almost like they are a co-author of the book. And I would say that Mike Correo, the designer, is a co-author, right? But he would never actually like list himself as one. But it's probably pretty simple. But like we live in a wildly visual society, right? And our capacity to integrate image and text and make them speak to each other just on like a technological level is so much higher, right? And we're doing it constantly all the time. So as a signifying tool, like I completely understand why people would embrace it, right? And use it as the image as something to put a poem into conversation with. I don't think I'm particularly skilled at it, but I'm very open to letting people do, like what they want with my work. So, yeah.
All right. Any last thoughts? All right. Let's give us a.
Okay. Thank you.